I'd like to talk to you about the developmental stages of a small church, or another way of saying it is the developmental stages of a small group. There was a book written by Neil McBride, which it was called How to Lead Small Groups. And in that, Mr. McBride identified, I believe, 6 phases. And that's what I'd like to go over is the 6 phases that I think that you will commonly see in most groups. And the reason for this teaching is as your group begins and then grows, there's going to be changes. And if you understand the developmental stages of those groups, it helps you to be comfortable because after all, sometimes people will say, well, why can't things just stay the same? Well, like life, there's a time where after birth you have the baby. There's the infancy stage. And then you also have the young childhood stage, you have the teenage stage, and then you have a maturing or an adult stage. Well, many times small groups, simple churches, our collection, our organizations, they go through these same phases. The very first one is what I call birth or infancy. This is where you've decided, you've gotten together with a couple people, and you're going to birth or plant a new church. You're going to start something new. It's what we call the forming stage. And in the forming stage, you'll see there's a lot of tentative behaviors. People don't know how to be. They're not sure what this group is going to be like. So, possibly you are a little tentative in how you interact or how you should be within this group. Sometimes you'll feel there's an awkwardness to the meetings, and it's kind of like, well, I hope this is going to work. And that's natural. You've decided you're going to start a group, and in the very beginning, it could be the first 3, 4, maybe half a dozen meetings. There's a little bit of awkwardness. But after you go through that, hopefully this is a short phase, and you transition into phase number 2, which is what we call the norming phase. In the norming phase, it's where behaviors become normalized. You begin to realize what to expect. This is like childhood. Think of a child who grows up and he needs to learn what are the proper behaviors, what can I do and what can't I do. And in the norming phase, as your church begins to grow and mature, there's going to be behaviors which will be determined to be acceptable and others that aren't. Now some people, when they first come in, they want that first energy of the forming. But forming is not where any of us will stay, and it's not where our churches will stay. We're going to begin to move into that norming stage, the childhood phase. But you're also learning what are the boundaries, and you're going to have to possibly explore at time. And every group has norms, spoken and unspoken, and this is a time when those norms are established. Then the third phase is after you've been meeting for a while and the boundaries are set and the behaviors are of what to be expected are informally determined, then we move into what we call the teenage years. That's a time of conformance. That's a conforming time. And those are times where there can be questioning, there can be growth. It can also be a confusing time. It can be where there's adjustments. What was normalized in the last phase, now, well, maybe some of those things are not what we really want to do. Maybe we need to question this. Why are we meeting this way, or why are we doing certain behaviors? And that's natural. Many times I've seen where people who are running small churches, that when they get into this conforming phase, they view the questions as rebellion and they get upset. Like, who are you to question my authority or the governance of this little group? But it's a healthy step. It's a good process. It's a point at which people can begin to express themselves. And if you're being a healthy group, then you want people to express their dissatisfactions or their differences of opinion. And you want to be able to work that through. That is a very highly productive relational phase of this group. And you need to grow through that. It's a healthy phase, and it might demonstrate that there's going to be some minor, maybe even some major adjustments that you need to make. Some mindsets that you had going into it might need to be changed. And if you can grow through that phase, Then the next phase that you'll enter to is what I call the maturing phase. It's the performing phase. It's when you're actually, things are humming along. People in their gifts and calling have been able to find their place. There's an actual performance that's going on. Things are just working smoothly. It's a very mature, functioning group. When problems surface, they're dealt with in a very godly, kind, and wholesome manner. It's a time when people, everybody is able to take their individual responsibility. Now, also, there's going to be a time when certainly new people are coming in, and that new person who comes in, they may have to go through the norming phase and then the conforming phase, but the majority, the central people who are responsible for your church, it's a mature group. It's functioning. They're alert to the various crises that happen in life, and they are dealing with them in a mature manner, where there's not unresolved conflicts, there's not tension under the surface. Issues are being raised, they're being dealt with, people are expressing their problems, their hurts, their victories, and it's a time again where there might need to be periodically some evaluation and some adjustment, but overall this is a mature group and you're really functioning well. Which brings you into the final, or not the final phase, but the second to last phase, which is the fruitful phase. You know, just as an adult goes, a person goes from teenager to a mature adult, but then the next phase is where they actually reproduce. They have children. And so every fellowship, I was involved with a group that we used to just split our home churches. I don't believe in splitting. I believe in birth. I believe in planting. That's life. And when you're in this mature, fruitful phase, then you're mentoring up people that you can see the gifts and calling on your life, and you can see this person, they're going to need to move on. They've got to be able to take responsibility for their own church, and so you work with them and you mentor them and you plant, and that people can flow between possibly two fellowships or two churches, and they're supporting one another. It's a point of great spiritual maturity. And if you're a healthy church, there should be growth. There should be times where you need to plant a new church, because fruit means that you're growing. But don't ever determine that you're not fruitful if you're just not adding people. I'm not quantifying fruit as in numbers, but yet there is an aspect to that too. And I think that just because you're not able to reach people is not a reason to get down on yourself. Jesus Christ said that the harvest was his problem. Our job is to go into the field, and to do the best. And he said to pray for workers for the harvest. But he's the Lord of the harvest. We just need to do our part. And as we move into that maturing phase, there will be fruitfulness. There will be reproduction. And that brings me to the last phase, which is old age. It's a very healthy phase where there needs to be a demise. There needs to be a time. And if done properly, as that group comes to an end, then a new group can reform and come out of it. I've seen fellowships where I lived on the West Coast, and because of my life situation, my wife Lori and I needed to move. So in the preparation of that, we took weeks upon weeks to try and do the best we could so that the fellowship would reform. Because with us stepping out of it and us not hosting it, it would be a new fellowship. It would be a new church. It would be a new plant. And that needed to reform. And our church needed to demise and do it in a healthy way so that the new one would be able to reform. There are times where, everybody just moves on and goes in a different direction. And don't beat yourself up if that happens, because the Lord brings us all into seasons, and if we can keep him at the center, then we can move forward. So these are the various developmental stages of the simple church or a small group. You have birth and infancy, you have childhood, teenage years, maturing, reproducing, and old age. And if you're healthy, you're going to see your fellowship go through all of these phases.